And Millionaire thought leaving his wife was the key to success. But the shocking truth he uncovered shattered his pride and left him speechless. What mistake could cost a millionaire everything he ever valued? Was abandoning his wife the greatest mistake of his life? The truth hidden for years might just destroy the empire he built. Stay with us to uncover the shocking revelation. In a world where chandeliers sparkled brighter than the stars, a millionaire built an empire that everyone envied. Towering mansions, gleaming marble floors, and halls filled with polite greetings painted a picture of perfection. Yet behind this facade of success, shadows lingered, whispers of a growing emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. At the heart of this golden empire was a quiet figure, often overlooked. Cecilia, the millionaire's wife, brought warmth to the cold brilliance of success. But as ambition soared, her presence faded into the background. The once shared dreams of love and partnership were consumed by the relentless pursuit of power and status. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, murmuring about a man who seemed to care more for his profits than his promises. Long nights at the office turned into distant mornings at home. Success had come at a price, but the true cost had yet to reveal itself. Then, one fateful decision changed everything. Convinced that control was the ultimate key to greatness, the millionaire chose to abandon the person who had once been the foundation of it all. It was a bold move, driven by pride, but in the golden halls of his life, a haunting question remained. Was this decision his greatest triumph or his deepest regret? Alexander stood at the edge of a decision that would alter his life forever. The world around him glittered with wealth and power, yet the most valuable connection in his life felt like a chain holding him back. He believed success demanded sacrifice, and in that moment, Cecilia became the price he was willing to pay. As Alexander walked away, her voice faltered, replaced by a silence filled with disbelief. Her tear-filled eyes pleaded for answers that never came. Every step he took further from her was a step deeper into a world of endless ambition. To him, it was not abandonment. It was liberation, or so he convinced himself. Immersed in his empire of deals and decisions, Alexander filled his days with the noise of progress. Contracts signed, profits gained, and boardrooms applauding his brilliance. Yet in the quiet moments, a different sound crept in. The memory of her laughter, the gentle way she believed in him when no one else did, replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. Each passing day weighed heavier. Even the grandest successes began to feel hollow. What was supposed to be a triumph over limitation was beginning to look like a surrender to emptiness. He began questioning if the empire he built was worth the loneliness echoing in its halls. What he did not realize, however, was that this choice would not only scar his heart but ripple into his carefully constructed world. There was a secret tethered to Cecilia that he had overlooked, one that would soon resurface, forcing him to confront a regret too heavy to ignore. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander buried the whispers of doubt, pretending they did not exist. But the shadows of his decision followed him, waiting for the moment he would finally have to face the truth. The whispers began as faint murmurs, but they grew louder with every passing day. In the gilded ballrooms and luxurious salons of high society, Alexander's decision to abandon Cecilia was not just a topic of conversation, it was the scandal of the season. Some praised his boldness, calling it the ruthless mark of a true visionary. He knows how to cut ties with anything holding him back, they said with approving nods over crystal glasses of champagne. But not everyone shared that sentiment. Beneath the glimmer of approval, a darker current flowed. Do you remember how devoted she was to him? An older woman whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. He threw away the only person who truly believed in him. Alexander, draped in the confidence of his carefully curated image, brushed off the judgment. He attended lavish gatherings and shook hands with powerful allies. But there were moments he could not ignore the glances, the hushed voices that seemed to echo wherever he went. The very halls that once celebrated his triumphs now carried a quiet warning. Ambition, unchecked by compassion, could destroy even the strongest foundation. At a gala, one of his closest peers leaned in, his voice low but pointed. You know, Alexander, they are calling this your greatest move. But tell me, what price are you really paying? The words lingered longer than Alexander cared to admit, gnawing at the edges of his carefully constructed confidence. He buried himself in his work, convincing himself that the noise would fade. Yet, the whispers only grew, carrying a cautionary weight that he could not escape. For the first time, cracks appeared in the facade he had worked so hard to build. What had seemed like a step toward greatness now felt like a step toward something far more dangerous, something he was not yet ready to face. Alexander sat in his office, the city lights reflecting off the polished glass walls around him. His world of precision and control suddenly felt unsteady. It was during a routine meeting when his most trusted confidant leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "Do you know," the confidant began, "how much Cecilia contributed to your success? She was not just there, Alexander. She shaped it." The words hit like a thunderclap. Alexander waved it off at first, dismissing it as sentimental nonsense. But as the hours passed, the memories began to surface, moments when her quiet insights had steered him away from disastrous ventures. Her unassuming suggestions had often become the backbone of his biggest wins, though he had barely noticed at the time. He reached for an old ledger, flipping through its pages, the numbers blurring together as his mind raced. The realization was suffocating. How many of his triumphs bore the silent imprint of Cecilia's wisdom? The deals he had once taken pride in felt hollow now, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. In the stillness of the night, another memory surfaced. Cecilia had once said softly, almost as a passing thought, "Sometimes the loudest voices drown out the quiet truths." He had laughed then, too busy planning his next move to give it weight. Now, those words seemed to echo louder than the applause of any boardroom he had ever sat in. Alexander's breath caught as he stared at his reflection in the glass. The man who prided himself on control, strategy, and vision suddenly saw the cracks. The truth gnawed at him. Cecilia's invisible presence had not just supported his empire, it had built it. And now, the foundation he had ignored felt like it might crumble under the weight of neglect. Alexander sat in the grand conference room, surrounded by polished wood tables and sharp gazes. The weight of expectation pressed heavily on him, but he maintained his composed exterior. Then, an unexpected voice pierced through the usual chorus of approval. "I cannot, in good conscience, continue this partnership," declared one of his most influential investors. The words were deliberate, measured, and laced with authority. A hush fell over the room as the investor's gaze fixed firmly on Alexander. "Your actions reflect poorly on this enterprise. Morals, Alexander, are as vital as profits." The statement echoed, louder than Alexander expected, and his carefully constructed facade seemed to tremble. The once assured confidence in the room shifted to silent uncertainty. As murmurs rippled among the other stakeholders, the gravity of the situation hit him like a sharp blow. The empire he had fought to preserve was now under siege, not from external forces, but from within. Later that night, Alexander sat alone in his study. The silence felt oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional rustling of papers he could no longer focus on. Memories of his proudest moments in business collided with the shadows of his recent choices. The investor's words played over and over in his mind, each time striking deeper. For years, Alexander had believed in strength through control, in shaping perception to fit an unyielding standard of perfection. But cracks had formed. Whispers of doubt were spreading, and the pillars of his empire seemed to sway. A sleepless night loomed, filled with restless thoughts and questions he could no longer avoid. How much longer could he hold this illusion together before everything came crashing down? In the stillness of the night, Alexander sat alone in the vast expanse of his penthouse. The once proud symbols of his achievements surrounded him: marble floors, towering windows, and glimmering chandeliers. Yet, they felt cold, lifeless. The storm outside roared like a reflection of the chaos inside his heart. The echoes of his arrogance whispered through the silence. Every decision he had made, every moment he had believed himself invincible, now stood before him like a haunting specter. Alexander clenched his fists, the weight of regret pressing on him like an immovable force. What have I done? His voice broke through the void, raw and trembling. Memories surfaced unbidden, laughter shared, moments of trust, and the quiet love he had so carelessly discarded. They were now ghosts, reminding him of everything he had lost. In his mind, Cecilia's voice returned, not in anger, but in quiet understanding. She had been his anchor, the balance to his ambition. Yet, in his pursuit of power, he had dismissed her worth, silencing the very voice that had steadied him. The storm's fury heightened, rattling the glass, as if the world outside mirrored his own crumbling pride. He thought of his empire, its cracks widening with each passing day. Could it all be undone? Could the man who had built an empire be reduced to this, a solitary figure drowning in regret? As the storm subsided, the stillness became unbearable. Alexander closed his eyes, one question rising above the noise. Can I ever fix this, or is it already too late? In the heart of the night, silence wrapped itself around Alexander's opulent penthouse. The space, once a sanctuary of ambition, now felt like a prison. He lay on the edge of his bed, staring into the darkness, where every shadow seemed to carry the echo of a life he had left behind. Faint whispers of the past began to invade his mind. A gentle laugh, a candlelit evening, the soft hum of Cecilia's voice when she spoke of dreams they once shared. These memories, once a source of pride, now sliced through him with the sharpness of regret. He could almost hear her say, "We built this together," a statement he had once brushed aside as inconsequential. He sat upright, gripping the edges of his bed as if holding on to something tangible could stop the flood of emotion. The stillness around him was deafening. What was it all for? He muttered under his breath, his voice breaking with the weight of unspoken sorrow. The question lingered in the air, unanswered and heavy. In his mind, he saw her smile, soft, enduring, yet undeniably distant. He remembered the nights she waited for him, the quiet support she gave without complaint, and the sacrifices she made without recognition. Each thought tightened the knot in his chest. For the first time in years, Alexander allowed himself to feel the weight of his choices. The silence grew louder, punctuated by his uneven breaths. The memories of a simpler time clawed at his resolve, forcing him to confront the truth. His relentless ambition had cost him far more than he had ever been willing to admit. The thought struck him like a storm breaking against the walls of his mind. Could he ever undo the damage, or had the weight of his choices sealed his fate forever? Alexander sat in the corner of a marble-clad boardroom, his eyes scanning the faces around him. Once, these were the trusted allies who had stood beside him during his meteoric rise. Now, their smiles were hollow, their words laced with hidden agendas. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were conspiring against him. "We have concerns," one partner began, his tone calm yet cutting. "Your recent decisions, they seem to lack the precision we once relied upon." Alexander's jaw tightened. He knew what was happening. Behind every polite word lay an unspoken ambition, a readiness to seize the cracks in his empire. Contracts were suddenly reinterpreted, deals once sealed with trust now shrouded in loopholes. Profits dipped, and the whispers grew louder, subtle accusations disguised as advice. Perhaps, another partner added, "It is time to rethink leadership strategies, for the good of the company, of course." In the lavish parties that followed, the rumors persisted. "He is losing control," they murmured, their words carried like venom through the glimmering halls. Yet no one said it to his face. The smiles, the handshakes, all a facade. Alexander returned to his penthouse late one evening, the city lights sprawling beneath him. The weight of betrayal pressed against his chest. He replayed their words, their carefully crafted sentences, over and over again. How did it come to this? He whispered to himself. The very people he had empowered were now dismantling his legacy piece by piece. He clenched his fists, but the anger soon gave way to fear. If they could turn so easily, what else might be waiting in the shadows? For the first time, Alexander felt the edges of his empire slipping from his grasp. In their relentless pursuit of their own gains, his partners had exploited his vulnerability. But the question remained, who among them was the mastermind, and how far would they go? Alexander sat alone at his desk, the golden glow of the city lights streaming through the glass wall behind him. In the silence, the sound of his own breathing felt loud, almost oppressive. His hand rested on a pen, frozen midair, as his mind was no longer focused on the contracts in front of him. Instead, it was lost in memories that refused to fade. Cecilia's voice echoed in his mind, calm, steady, and full of quiet wisdom. He remembered the times she would sit beside him, offering gentle suggestions that often seemed insignificant at the moment. But now those moments loomed large. He recalled one evening years ago when her advice had steered him away from a disastrous business deal. At the time, he had dismissed her insights with a casual nod, more preoccupied with his ambition than her words. "Why did I not see it then?" he muttered, his voice heavy with regret. Each memory came sharper than the last, her unwavering support, her presence during his darkest hours. Cecilia had been the foundation he never acknowledged, the quiet force behind his success. His chest tightened as another memory surfaced. It was a rainy night, and he had just won a major deal. Cecilia had prepared a quiet celebration at home, lighting candles and serving his favorite meal. But instead of gratitude, he had brushed her aside, consumed by his next big plan. "It will all make sense when we reach the top," he had said then. Now that moment felt like a knife twisting in his heart. The weight of his guilt grew unbearable. Every achievement, every trophy of his success now felt hollow. He whispered into the silence, "I traded love for ambition, and what do I have now?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The darkness around him felt alive, pressing in as if to remind him of all he had lost. Yet, amid the turmoil, one thought lingered. Was it too late to make things right? Or had the price of his arrogance already consumed everything that mattered? Alexander stared blankly at the document in his hand. The words blurred as the weight of their meaning sank in. Cecilia's home, the modest house where their dreams once lived, was at risk. Her debts had spiraled out of control, and without intervention, she would lose the last piece of their shared past. His chest tightened. Memories of that home flooded back. The laughter they once shared over simple meals, the evenings spent dreaming of a life they could build together. Now those walls faced ruin, and he was powerless to stop the ache of guilt rising within him. "How did it come to this?" he muttered, his voice barely audible in the vast silence of his office. The next morning, the boardroom was filled with tension as Alexander's advisors debated the fallout of recent events. Whispers of Cecilia's plight reached even the corners of his empire, stirring rumors and judgments. One advisor leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Intervening would show weakness, Alexander. You have a reputation to uphold." But Alexander's mind drifted. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that this was not just a financial decision, it was a reckoning. The thought of doing nothing, of letting Cecilia face this alone, was unbearable. Yet stepping in meant confronting his pride and risking further scrutiny. Alone that evening, he paced his penthouse, torn between action and inaction. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but they offered no comfort. His thoughts spiraled, replaying every mistake, every moment of neglect. His grip on his glass tightened as he whispered, "Do I let her fall, or do I destroy what little remains of myself to make it right?" The answer eluded him, but the question refused to fade. Time was slipping away, and with it, any chance of redemption. Alexander stared at the phone screen, his fingers trembling over the send button. The words he had crafted carried the weight of years of silence and regret. "I know I failed you, Cecilia. I want to make things right. Please, can we talk?" With a deep breath, he pressed send, his heart pounding as if it were trying to escape the cage of his chest. The minutes that followed felt like hours. He stared at the screen, willing it to light up with a response, but the silence was unrelenting. Every passing moment magnified his doubts. Did she even read the message? Was she too hurt to reply? The quiet became unbearable, filling the room like an oppressive fog. Memories flooded his mind, unbidden and unrelenting. He saw her smile, the way her eyes lit up when they shared moments of joy. He heard her voice, steady and comforting, urging him to slow down and cherish the life they were building. Now those echoes mocked him, a stark contrast to the silence that screamed louder than any words ever could. As the hours dragged on, Alexander's resolve began to falter. He dialed her number, the weight of desperation evident in every press of the keypad. The call went unanswered. He tried again, his voice catching in his throat as he whispered, "Please, Cecilia, just pick up." Still nothing. The emptiness of the silence was deafening. It forced him to confront a reality he had long ignored. Words might never be enough to bridge the chasm he had created. Alexander sat at his mahogany desk, the soft rustle of papers breaking the stillness of the room. His fingers brushed against an aged folder, its edges frayed with time. As he opened it, a folded letter slipped out, landing softly on the polished wood. Intrigued, he unfolded it, his eyes narrowing as they scanned the faded ink. With each word, his breath grew heavier. The letter was signed by Cecilia, detailing strategies and insights he had once claimed as his own. She had not only supported his ambitions, she had been the silent architect of his greatest success. Every paragraph was a revelation, peeling back layers of arrogance that had blinded him for years. "How did I miss this?" he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Images of Cecilia filled his mind, her calm demeanor during heated discussions, her gentle nudges when he stood at a crossroads. He remembered moments when her quiet wisdom had saved him from catastrophic decisions. He had always dismissed her contributions as inconsequential, a background hum in the cacophony of his ambition. The realization hit him like a wave, pulling him under with its weight. His chest tightened as he gripped the letter. She gave everything, and I gave her nothing in return. The opulence of the study felt suffocating. The grandeur that once symbolized his triumph now mocked him. Each gilded detail a reminder of how he had built his empire on a foundation of neglect. A faint hope flickered within him. Could this acknowledgement be the first step toward repairing what he had shattered? As he folded the letter carefully, a thought lingered. If she was the force behind my success, can I still make things right? The question hung in the air unanswered as the weight of his discovery settled deep into his soul. Alexander sat motionless in the dim glow of his study, the letter still clutched in his trembling hands. His chest heaved, each breath shallow and ragged, as the weight of Cecilia's words bore down on him. He leaned back in the armchair, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as a flood of memories poured through his mind. Her laughter, soft and warm, echoed faintly in his ears. He saw her smile, the way it lit up their quiet evenings. He recalled the subtle nods of encouragement she offered when his confidence wavered. But those moments had vanished, drowned beneath the relentless tide of ambition. "I let it all slip away," he whispered, his voice cracking under the strain of his regret. Tears welled in his eyes as he clutched the letter tighter, his knuckles white. Why did I not see it before? She gave me everything, her love, her wisdom, and I gave her nothing but silence. The words spilled out like a confession, each syllable piercing the stillness of the room. His luxurious penthouse, with its opulent furnishings and dazzling skyline view, felt suffocating. Every polished surface reflected his failure, each grand possession a stark reminder of what he had sacrificed. "This, all of this," he murmured, gesturing at his surroundings. "It is worthless without her." For the first time in years, Alexander allowed himself to cry. His pride, once an impenetrable shield, crumbled under the force of his remorse. Each tear carried the weight of unspoken apologies, a desperate plea for forgiveness he could never articulate. The silence around him grew heavier, an unbearable void. And yet, a question lingered in his mind, unrelenting in its torment. Could he ever make amends? Or had he reached the point where redemption was no longer within reach? Alexander stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on his chest. Then, with trembling hands still clutching Cecilia's letter, he surged forward. There was no time for hesitation. Each step through the sprawling corridors of his penthouse was fueled by the urgency in his heart. "This is it," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. "I cannot let this slip away." His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from his crumbling empire, but he silenced it without a glance. Contracts failing, investors demanding answers. None of it mattered now. All he could see was the possibility of redemption slipping through his fingers if he waited any longer. Sliding into his car, he gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. The city stretched out before him, a kaleidoscope of neon lights and rain-soaked streets. The tires screeched as he pushed the accelerator, his mind racing faster than the car. "Please," he whispered, "let there still be time." Each turn felt like an eternity, each red light a cruel reminder of his failures. The rain hit the windshield with relentless force, mirroring the storm within him. He gritted his teeth, replaying every moment he had taken Cecilia for granted. "How can I have been so blind?" he whispered to no one. As he neared the familiar neighborhood where her modest home stood, his heart pounded in his chest. The once proud businessman was now a desperate man, clinging to the faint hope that his apology might mean something. But as he approached her street, one question haunted him. Was it already too late to mend what he had broken? Alexander's breath caught as he stepped into the small cafe. The hum of casual chatter and clinking cups faded into the background as his eyes found Cecilia, seated by the window. Her gaze was fixed on the street outside, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. For a fleeting moment, he hesitated. Could he really face her, knowing the damage he had done? He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in his ears. When she finally turned to look at him, the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. It pierced through him, stripping away the layers of pride he had once clung to. "Cecilia." His voice broke, and he swallowed hard. I do not even know where to begin." Her silence spoke volumes. When she finally responded, her tone was measured but heavy with emotion. "Begin where it all fell apart, Alexander. Tell me why now? After all this time?" His hands trembled as he placed the worn letter on the table between them. "I found this," he said softly. "I read every word, and for the first time I understood. I understood how blind I have been, how much I owe you." Cecilia's expression hardened, though her voice wavered. "You understood? Now, after years of watching you dismiss my efforts, my love, as if they were insignificant. Do you know what it feels like to give everything to someone who only takes?" "I was wrong," Alexander said, his voice raw with regret. "I was selfish, arrogant, blinded by ambition. But I see it now. I see you, and I am so sorry." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Sorry will not erase the years, Alexander. Sorry will not bring back what was lost." He nodded slowly, his chest tightening. "I know, but I cannot leave things this way. Tell me what I can do to make this right." Cecilia took a long breath, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "You cannot fix what has already been broken. But maybe, just maybe, you can prove that you are more than your mistakes." As the tension between them reached its peak, Alexander realized that the road to redemption would not be easy. Yet, for the first time in years, he was willing to try. Alexander's heart raced as he saw the small plume of smoke rising from the cafe's kitchen. The smell of burning oil was unmistakable, and the faint sound of alarm bells cut through their already strained conversation. His eyes darted to Cecilia, who had turned to look toward the commotion with a mix of confusion and fear. "Stay here," he said urgently, rising from his seat. But before he could take another step, a waiter hurried past, shouting, "Everyone, please move outside, quickly." Cecilia rose too, instinctively gripping her bag. The rush of people toward the exit pushed them closer together. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the cafe, and the lights flickered. Alexander turned to her, his voice firm but trembling. "We need to move now." As they hurried toward the door, Cecilia stumbled. Without hesitation, Alexander caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "I am fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed her unease. For a brief moment, their eyes met, hers wide with vulnerability, his softened with unexpected care. The crowd surged forward, and Alexander instinctively placed a protective arm around her, guiding her toward the exit. Outside, the cool night air hit them like a wave, and the noise of fire trucks blaring down the street filled the tense silence. Cecilia turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did not have to do that." "I could not let anything happen to you," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Not again." She looked away, the weight of his words sinking in. "Alexander, this does not change the past." "I know," he replied, his tone pleading, "but it changes how I see the future. I cannot lose you again, Cecilia. Please give me a chance to prove that I can be better." Her gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable. The distant glow of the cafe's fire cast flickering shadows around them, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. In that moment, neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them, a fragile, flickering hope that perhaps, just perhaps, redemption was still within reach. Alexander sat alone in his office. The once polished mahogany desk now littered with files and papers that seemed to mock him. The faint glow of the computer screen cast a pale light over his weary face, highlighting the lines etched by years of unchecked ambition. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to sit in the silence, to truly reflect. His hands hovered over the phone, his mind replaying the countless betrayals he had endured and inflicted. He clenched his fists, the weight of his choices pressing heavily on his chest. "This cannot go on," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city outside. With trembling fingers, he began dialing. His first call was to Marcus, the business partner who had once been a trusted ally but had long since become a symbol of greed. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered, sharp and calculating. "Alexander, I was just..." "It is over, Marcus," Alexander interrupted, his tone resolute. "Our partnership, the deals, everything. I am cutting ties." A stunned silence followed before Marcus laughed bitterly. "You think you can walk away from this mess? You will not last a month without me." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Maybe not, but I would rather rebuild from scratch than continue down this path. Goodbye." He ended the call before Marcus could respond, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the consequences would be swift, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of something he had not felt in years: freedom. As he sat back in his chair, his thoughts drifted to Cecilia. The image of her face, filled with quiet strength and unwavering support, filled his mind. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through old messages he had ignored, each one a testament to her patience. Could he find the courage to reach out, to seek redemption, even knowing it might be too late? Alexander closed his eyes, exhaling deeply. "One step at a time," he murmured, his voice steadier now. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he was ready to walk it, not for his empire, but for the man he hoped to become. Alexander sat at his desk, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the stack of papers. Each document was another step toward undoing the damage his arrogance had wrought. The memories of Cecilia's quiet support lingered in his mind like shadows, unseen but undeniably present. He sighed deeply and reached for his pen, signing off on the last payment that would erase her debts. It was not enough, he knew, but it was a start. As he put the papers aside, he picked up the phone and dialed his attorney. "Make sure the house is secured," he said firmly. "I do not want her worrying about anything anymore." The voice on the other end hesitated before responding. "Are you certain about this, Alexander? It is a significant amount." "I am certain," Alexander interrupted, his tone resolute. "It is the least I can do." Hanging up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decision settling over him. The luxurious surroundings of his penthouse now felt hollow, a far cry from the warmth and simplicity of Cecilia's home. For the first time, he understood the depth of her sacrifices, the quiet strength it took to support someone so blinded by ambition. His phone buzzed with a notification, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Cecilia, a simple thank you. The words were brief, but carried an unspoken depth. He stared at the screen, his chest tightening as he read them over and over. Could this small gesture be the beginning of rebuilding the bridge he had burned? Alexander stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city that had once symbolized his success. Now it felt like a reflection of his failures, a sprawling, glittering facade hiding cracks beneath the surface. He took a deep breath, his resolve heartening. This was not about redemption through wealth or power. It was about proving through action that he could be better. As he turned away from the window, he whispered to himself, "It is not too late, not yet." The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile, flickering light guiding him toward a future where trust and love could be rebuilt. Alexander sat across from Cecilia in the dimly lit cafe, his hands nervously clutching the edge of the table. The quiet hum of conversations around them seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Cecilia's eyes, guarded yet brimming with unspoken emotion, met his, and the weight of the moment hung heavy between them. I do not know where to start," Alexander began, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked down at his hands, searching for words that could carry the enormity of his regret. "I failed you, Cecilia. In every way that matters, I failed." Cecilia tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It is not just about failure, Alexander. It is about trust. It is about everything you let slip away." The words struck him like a blow, but he nodded, accepting the truth of her statement. "I let my ambition blind me. I ignored the sacrifices you made, the wisdom you offered. I was so consumed by my own success that I forgot what mattered most." For a moment, Cecilia said nothing. Her gaze softened slightly, though the pain lingered. "Do you think words can fix this? After all these years, do you believe an apology is enough?" "No," Alexander replied quickly, his voice trembling. "I know it is not enough, but I want to make it right, even if it takes the rest of my life. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to prove that I have changed." Cecilia sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "You cannot undo the past, Alexander. But maybe you can start by being honest, not just with me, but with yourself." Her words settled over him like a gentle, bittersweet balm. He leaned forward, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "I am ready to face whatever it takes, to rebuild what I destroyed, piece by piece, but only if you let me." Silence stretched between them, fragile yet filled with possibility. Cecilia's eyes searched his, and for the first time in years, a flicker of hope appeared in her expression. "I will not make this easy for you," she said, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "But I will listen." Alexander nodded, his chest tightening with a mix of relief and determination. "That is all I ask." As they sat there, the air between them shifted, no longer weighed down by years of pain, but tinged with the faint promise of a new beginning. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, they were both willing to try. And in that quiet cafe, amid shattered promises and hesitant forgiveness, the first fragile bridge toward healing was built. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression softening as the weight of years lifted just slightly. "Cecilia," he began, his voice calm yet resolute, "I know I cannot erase the damage I caused, but I can promise you this: I will never let my ambition blind me again." Cecilia studied him, her fingers wrapped around her cup, the warmth seeping into her hands. "Words are easy, Alexander," she replied, her voice carrying both weariness and a flicker of cautious hope. "What makes this time any different?" He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Because I see it now. The sacrifices you made, the moments you stood by me when I did not even bother to notice. And because I am no longer afraid to face my own failures. A faint smile tugged at the corners of Cecilia's lips, though her eyes remained guarded. It is not about fear, Alexander. It is about trust. Do you know how fragile that is? How easily it shatters? Alexander nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. I do, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that I can be someone worthy of your trust. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy. It carried the gentle promise of a new beginning. Maybe, Cecilia said softly, maybe we can start small, one step at a time. He leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. One step is all I need. The cafe, once a backdrop of tension, now seemed to exhale a quiet warmth. The hum of the world around them faded as the two shared a hesitant but heartfelt understanding. For the first time, the possibility of something new began to take shape, not as a guarantee, but as a fragile hope worth nurturing. And in that moment, the seeds of transformation were sown. Alexander stood before the gate of the mansion, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and longing. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring him back to the very place where his life had both risen and crumbled. His hands trembled as he pushed the gate open, each creak a reminder of the heavy burden of his past choices. In the dim light of the entryway, his eyes caught sight of a faded envelope lying atop a dusty chest of drawers. It bore Cecilia's familiar handwriting, delicate yet firm, as though it carried the weight of unspoken truths. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the worn paper, and slowly unfolded the letter within. The words spilled onto the page like a flood of emotions, revealing a story he had never fully understood. Cecilia had poured her heart into every line, detailing the sacrifices she had made in silence. She wrote of sleepless nights spent guiding his dreams, of the times she chose to stand in his shadow to protect him from failure, and of the love she clung to despite his indifference. Alexander's vision blurred as tears welled up. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Why did I never see it? Why did I take her for granted?" The letter's final words struck a deep chord. Love is not just about the grand gestures, Alexander. It is about the quiet moments of trust, the sacrifices made without expectation. I never stopped believing in you, even when you stopped believing in us. He fell to his knees, the letter clutched tightly in his hands. For the first time, the weight of his arrogance bore down on him completely. I was blind, Cecilia, he murmured. But I see it now. I see you. A spark of determination ignited within him. This moment, raw and unfiltered, became his turning point. He vowed to honor her sacrifices, not with empty promises, but through action, through change. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he was willing to face it with humility. As he stood, the cool night air wrapped around him, carrying a sense of quiet hope. The mansion, once a symbol of his unchecked ambition, now stood as a reminder of the love and trust he had nearly lost. Alexander knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but he also knew it was the only way to truly find redemption. The audience is left with a single question lingering in their hearts. Can love, when anchored in honesty and change, truly heal the deepest wounds? If this story moved you, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories of redemption, hope, and second chances. Remember, every journey of transformation begins with the courage to face the truth.